From the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco, this is the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, hosted by Ron Young.
Welcome to a Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Fun to be here in front of these beautiful windows looking out on the bay. I don't know when we look out here and it isn't fun, because even when it's foggy, it's beautiful to look out over across San Francisco Bay. John Lennon and remember Yoko Ono, they lived at the Fontana years ago, and he was once quoted as saying, looking out the window at San Francisco Bay, it doesn't matter whether it's sunny or rainy, the bay keeps changing colors all the time. And he said it was the most fascinating skyline he'd ever looked at. And we get to look at it all the time here at the St. Francis Yacht Club. So while we're here, we keep seeing these big ships come back and forth all the time. And those of us who began wondering about it thought we might want to hear from somebody who knows all about this topic. Our speaker today first got on a sailboat when he was 6 or 7, a little 40-foot sailboat that the family had. And then he went to San Francisco, went to San Diego State. As a high school football player, he was a 6'2", 220 tackle. And if you know what a tackle is, you want to stay out of his way. This is a really, really, really good pre-college adventure for him to have. He went to work after college for Sealand. And if you remember Sealand, they were the pioneering container shipyard or shipping company. Pioneer Container Shipping Company. And the entire world of transportation changed with the containerization. Beginning in 1957, and so he was at a very important company. In '99, Maersk bought the company, bought the logistics company, the shipping company, the terminals and all that, and he spent several years with them, and then went to CMA, the French shipping company, for 5 years before 2020, when he became the Director of Maritime for the Port of Oakland. Now, the Port of Oakland is one of the biggest ports on the West Coast, and the change with containerization meant that the automated mechanisms that we're going to look at, and he's going to talk about today, transformed the whole transport world. The cost of transportation has dropped steadily since containerization. When I was a little kid, and we were remembering the echoes of Harry Bridges on the San Francisco waterfront, the cargo nets would lay out inside of a ship, and people would put boxes and refrigerators and whatever else they wanted in these cargo nets, and big cranes would pick them up and put them on the piers, and people would scurry around and put those contents onto trucks and drive them off someplace. That's way more cumbersome and stupid compared to the world of containerization, where stuff gets packed efficiently into a container. They get stacked up to 4,500 containers on a ship and shipped all around the world, and then they come to terminals like Brian's going to talk about today, and you'll see how they're in fact able to remove like one container every literally 10 seconds on one ship, and they can do multiple ships at a time. So I'm looking forward to learning all about this revolutionary new technology and the latest state-of-the-art equipment that they have over in the Port of Oakland. So welcome the Director of Maritime. Come on up, Bryan Brandes.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for that those kind remarks and opening. I'm always I listen to it sometimes, and I'm like, all right, I guess that's who I am. I've done all that. But yeah, so I now at the end of the year, I've been at the Port of Oakland for 3.5 years, and it's been a tremendous experience. You know, as Ron said, I've been with the private companies, private shipping companies, my entire career. So it's for any of those that have worked in the public sector, much different than the private sector, but it's an interesting change. So let me start off. I think you gave a good introduction, good background, so I won't repeat that. But so who is the Port of Oakland? And so I think most of you are much more familiar than some of the groups I present to. You know, a lot of you clearly see the vessels passing through here. And when you're on the water, you have the opportunity to get closer to the vessels and then actually, approach and tour the Port of Oakland. So, again, this is a great group that's, clearly much more interested in our business than some. But who are we? So the Port of Oakland, it's not just the port. The Port of Oakland operates the airport, the Seaport, which I'm the director of, and then a fair amount of commercial real estate properties in between the airport and the seaport. Combined, it represents 98,000 jobs that are directly related to the airport and seaport and commercial real estate. It's one of the largest job producers on the East Bay. So it's a critical importance to the Bay Area. In the seaports, we are a landlord port, and what does that mean? Is that we primarily lease out to terminal operators who then have agreements with the ocean carriers that bring cargo into the area, and and then they actually handle and work the vessels. So really, our role is as a landlord is to build the facilities, maintain the facilities, and then really facilitate and help the companies, in international commerce and domestic commerce. And what that means is we, work with the customers, we, work with our, the trade partners, the ocean carriers, and in the actual logistic companies, really to try to move more volume through the Port of Oakland, both import and export. So why is, and this is probably, a bad question to throw out to you guys, but why is ocean transportation still so critically important? And I think you guys all, realize how critical, the ocean is in waterborne transportation. But it is still, and always it has been. I can't say it'll always will be, but I think so. For a number of years, it's the most, economical solution in a mode of transport of moving goods, and it's the most environmentally friendly. So it's, you should really aim, logistic companies should really aim at using, the waterborne transportation to move to the closest, location, and then, transport via rail or truck on that last final mile. So it's when I say it's the most economical, it's, it could cost the same to move it, from Hong Kong to Oakland as it does trucking it from LA to Oakland. I mean, you could almost pay the same rate, which is, it just doesn't make sense. Ron mentioned we're one of the largest on the West Coast. There's essentially 3 seaport complexes along the U.S. West Coast. There's a couple in Canada, but to the north of us, there's Seattle and Tacoma, Oakland right here in the center, and then there's down south is Los Angeles and Long Beach. LA and Long Beach combined are by far the behemoth on the West Coast. Tacoma and Seattle are second. Oakland is third, and then there's a couple other smaller players. Port Hueneme in Ventura County, and then San Diego. Then, as I mentioned, there's a couple in Canada. So the what's a little different about Oakland is that we're considered a balanced port. What that means is most of the containers that come in, well, they're import containers coming in, and we're balanced with exports going out instead of empties going out. Most ports around the country, majority of the containers moving out of the U.S. are empties going back to Asia or back to another foreign country. And the imports, most people question what are the top, commodities and imports coming in. Well, first of all, China, the origin is predominantly still China. It's over 50% of the cargo coming into the U.S. Through Oakland is coming through China, and it's all the stuff you use. The most popular commodities coming in are furniture, appliances, clothing, apparel, any type of empty bottles for the wine industry, plastic bottles for bottling water. So any type of consumables that you're using are coming in as imports through the Port of Oakland. Besides China, the main countries of origin are Vietnam, and there is a shift of cargo and manufacturing shifting, from China down south. But China will still be the behemoth for many years to come. But Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. And as far as our exports, I said, we're pretty well balanced, and we are, the number one commodity moving out of Oakland, and unfortunately, its volume is scrap. It's scrap paper, scrap metal, but number 2 and number 2 to number 20 are really, the areas we really try to focus on, and these are all the agricultural products. So due to the proximity, the close, growing region, the really fertile Central Valley is so close to Oakland. Oakland is the really premier gateway for the agricultural industry, to export their goods outside the U.S. The goods, that are, primarily being exported are dried fruits and nuts. So a lot of almonds. Oakland is by far the largest almond exporter out of the U.S. And these almonds are going all over the world, but predominantly Asia and India, and then to Europe. California is the #1 region for growing almonds in the world. We also have a lot of citrus, fresh citrus. Oranges. You think of Florida, but there's still California produces a lot of oranges, a lot of table grapes. Seasonal items, and then the #1 value commodity in agricultural is fresh and frozen proteins. So beef, chicken, pork, going to Japan and to Korea as well as to China. But the highest value cargo is going to is fresh beef going to Japan. On all the exports, on all the fruits and everything, unfortunately, unless you go directly to a farmer's market in the stores, we're getting the second-tier commodity in every grocery store. All the top-tier commodities are all being exported. Everything is, again, unless you're going to a farmer's market. So the best grapes, the best oranges, are labeled for export unless they're at a farmer's market. So how are we improving? Most of you or many people had never really been aware of the ports. They see them but over this whole supply chain congestion during COVID, most people weren't really aware what's going on, and now are concerned with okay, what are ports doing? Are they stable? And how are we going to improve to avoid future conflict or future congestion? And just to clarify with everyone, yes, the congestion, I think it's clear, but yes, we're through the congestion. There's really no more congestion. Everything is stocked on the shelves. When you go buy things, when you order stuff online, there's really, it's really readily available. It's, you might have some delays, but that's, it's really not due to shipping. Actually, right now, most of the warehouses, especially furniture, are full. So most of the warehouses still have pretty high level of inventory. That's where our volume is kind of softened a little bit, because during COVID, a lot of people were moving, buying new houses, resupplying it, with new furniture, new appliances, buying Pelotons. I joke now, if you haven't bought a Peloton yet, you're not going to buy a Peloton. So it's the volume has kind of softened just because of our buying patterns. And now we're just really buying stuff, consumables, clothes, and just normal things that would routinely be repaired. So as I mentioned, what are we doing to improve the port? We really have 4 different areas for improvement in the port, and that's basic modernization. The Port of Oakland is an older facility, so we have to do basic modernization, such as upgrading all of our, which we're in process now, upgrading all of our sewer systems, our water lines, and then proven very expensive and difficult is upgrading all of our electrical infrastructure, our substations, and transmission within the port. The port is also its own utility, so we do purchase wholesale on the market. We get a lot of the power transmitted to us over PG&E lines, but we purchase power on the wholesale market and resell it within the port. We're spending a lot of money upgrading our electrical infrastructure to prepare for the transition really to battery-operated and electrical equipment, which I'll talk about in a minute. We're also, with modernizing the port, we're enhancing certain features within the port to ensure that we're able to handle larger vessels. So when vessels range anywhere from 2,000 TEUs, and a TEU is a 20-foot equivalent unit. So when you look at a vessel, you'll see the containers on there, and there's really only there's 3 sizes, but majority of them are 2 sizes, 20-footers or 40-footers. And a 20-footer is called a 20-foot equivalent unit. So the vessels they range from about 4,000 TEUs to 18,000 TEUs that call the Port of Oakland. But we're building and modernizing the wharfs to be able to handle 24,000 TEU vessels, which is about the max being built in the industry today. We're modernizing the facilities to be able so that all the facilities can handle that large of a vessel. I'm not a naval architect, but if there are any, they've stated that about 24,000 TEUs is about the max they're going to get. It's about 1,300 feet, and they say anything longer than that, it's too long, and it has too many problems of when you're out in the ocean of hitting too many, too much tension, I guess, between within the vessel itself. So they say when you're down below in a vessel and you're looking, all the way down, to the forward end of the vessel, that when you're out there and the ship is going in between the waves, that when you're in dock, you can see all the way forward into the vessel. When you're out there in the ocean and you have some decent swells, they say the vessel bends so much that you can't see all the way. And this vessel, the outer hull, it's inch and a half thick steel. So I mean, it's amazing the amount of torque and tension that these vessels go through. So as I mentioned, we're really spending a lot of money upgrading our electrical infrastructure, and this is a lot to do with transitioning to zero emissions. The transitioning to zero emissions, cleaning, providing cleaner air for our communities, is critically important to the Port of Oakland. We've been doing this for years. It's not something new. Since 2005, we've already reduced by 86% in emissions, and that's primarily due to we require all of our vessels to be plugged in. So when the vessels come in, they immediately plug in. I would imagine your vessels are plugged in here on dock as well. But that's a significant savings of emissions, and it also really helps the lines. It helps the crewmen on the ship. Gives them time to work on the vessel, repair the vessel, and it's also much quieter. They don't have to to hang out with the engines running the whole time. The diesel generators. But we're working with the terminal operators to transition to zero emissions. So most of the equipment now on terminals is diesel. It's already the cleanest diesel available. We're using Tier 4 engines, and we're using biodiesel on the terminals, which again is the cleanest available right now. But we're really trying to go that next step and really address that last tail of emissions, which is proving to be very costly, and then the technology that's available now is constantly improving. So all the yard equipment, there's a variety of yard equipment. You can't just go down to the store and purchase it and have it delivered. All this stuff is constantly being re-engineered, redesigned, and the next thing off the market is even better than the past. So right now there's a few different technologies that are available, and it's the industry is mixed between whether they want to go battery electric or whether they want to go hydrogen, and there's, as I mentioned, most of the equipment that's you purchase right now is really considered a prototype. The next one off the assembly line is better, and both battery electric and hydrogen have their advantages and disadvantages. Battery electric, it's difficult and time consuming to charge. Like if anybody has an electric vehicle here now, you essentially charge them at night. You're not driving at night. But in ship operations or vessel terminal operations, you're running an operation 24/7. Essentially, there's a few hours in the middle of the night that are dead. But it's not enough time to charge it throughout the entire time. So looking at different technologies, battery swaps, or just different technology. That's why a lot of them are leaning more towards hydrogen, because hydrogen more mimics that of diesel. But there's, not to get too in the weeds, but there's two components of hydrogen: hydrogen as a fuel cell, so hydrogen producing electricity, or hydrogen as a combustion engine, also known as ICE. And this is really going to be the standard. It is the standard for Europe and most other countries. It's not completely accepted yet in California, because it still does produce 0.004 emissions. It's almost zero, but it's not quite zero. So the industry has still a little bit of work to do to gain acceptance on ICE, but ICE really truly mimics that replacement of diesel. We're also working with trucking companies. to help them, obtain grants to transition their trucks over to zero emissions. And they have the same dilemma, whether it's they're going to go battery electric or hydrogen. The cost of a diesel truck right now is about $200,000, new diesel. The cost of an electric truck is $500,000. The cost of a hydrogen truck is $700,000. So there's some significant, cost increases that are difficult for, employees and companies just to absorb. So these costs, of course, will be passed on, to us as end consumers. But there has been a lot of grant money available, both within the state and federal grant money. So we hope that money continues. It's going for a good cause, and we're excited. Sorry, I'm moving this background. The other areas we're really trying to improve is improving our customer experience. We're the Port of Oakland, as I mentioned, is really focusing on its agricultural, exports, but we're also focusing in on our imports. I like to, talk to our team and talk to the customers to try to create stickiness. So, it's a cargo is described as discretionary or non-discretionary. So cargo, if it's discretionary, it's going to Chicago or somewhere, inland. So it can discharge anywhere along the West Coast, rail into Chicago, and it doesn't care what port of entry it came into. Whereas, cargo going into the Central Valley, into Stockton, it really, should be coming through the Port of Oakland versus Port of LA and Long Beach and being trucked up. And so we're really trying to work with our customers, build warehouses in the Central Valley, and even into, as far as into Reno, really to create the stickiness to attract more cargo into the Oakland Bay. We've been successful in that. We're at the same time we're trying to transition more of that cargo into the Central Valley and to Reno, transitioning it from truck into rail, and this is going to be a multi-year transition. California is in the process of building at least 4 inland rail ramps. They're called short-haul rail ramps. In the past, that really hadn't been or it hadn't been financially feasible, just due to the amount of handoffs and interchanges that you do. Now, with these trucks, as I mentioned, being so expensive, and other regulations brought on by California, it's becoming much more economical and financially feasible to transition from truck into rail. So you will be seeing more cargo going via rail than truck. And it's also for a place like Reno. Highway 80 gets closed periodically throughout the winter due to snow. So the trains keep going. After a train storm, there will be a snow plow on the train tracks. The trains do not stop. They will not let a snowstorm stop the trains. So whereas the roads could be closed for a little bit. So that's another benefit of trying to move more cargo via the rail. So a lot of conversation around transitioning to zero emissions, and we're proud to be part of that. Another area we're really working on, and this is stemmed from the congestion area, is providing data, and this is more along the lines of improving the customer experience. But there was a lot of talk about customers not understanding and where their containers were during the congestion period, and there was some truth to that. Where we're really helping with is really trying to improve the trucker experience. The truckers are the main contact that use the land side of the ports. The vessels, the carriers, the water side, the truckers on the land side. So we're doing a lot of different initiatives to really help their experience. We're providing an application that they can use on their phone to provide turn times, expected wait times outside the terminals, traffic congestion areas throughout the throughout the terminal complex, and then also traffic issues going into the port. We also have some parking available for both trucks and containers within the port complex, and this app provides the ability to reserve parking spots within the port. We also have weigh and motion scales now, and so the truckers can just drive through a certain lane and weigh in motion just to certify that they're legal when they're going out with their load. So a lot around data. The other area where that's geared towards the trucking companies. We're also doing something else geared more towards, just people that are generally interested in the port, and shipping executives, and myself, is a dashboard that really shows, what the health of the port is. It's going to have a page with all the metrics. It just shows the, past volume, anticipated volume for, into the weekly volume. It's going to show, trends on dwell. So how much, the average dwell of a container is in the yard, this week versus last week versus the last couple weeks. It's going to show the average dwell on the street. And by looking at these things, you can just really determine whether or not, the port is healthy, or whether or not you should try to, move more cargo through the port, or try to back off a little bit and, adjust your shipping patterns. So this is really to try to help the shipping industry, avoid, conflicts, and not everyone go through, the same area at the same time. The Port of LA, the Port of Long Beach is also, moving forward with these data initiatives, and we're really trying to work together. The state of California has provided $30 million for us to essentially work together and provide these data initiatives. There's been a lot of available money lately within the states and federal, which I think most of you are aware of. As I mentioned, we're also, spending a lot of time with our importers and exporters, and working on the short haul, rail concepts. I'm repeating myself a little bit, but that's really where we see, the future of Oakland, growing. Oakland is, it just doesn't have the capacity of LA Long Beach to be, a major intermodal port to move a lot of rail volume inland into Chicago, Kansas City, Memphis, Atlanta. But really, we should be, and we really are, a niche port for Northern California and the Rocky Mountain states. So, Northern Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. And that's really where we're focusing on, and all the cargo going into those areas, in and out of those areas, really should come through the Port of Oakland. So how can you help if you want to help? So, clearly most of you, consumers interested in jobs in the agricultural, and that's really, paying attention to port projects, paying attention to, state initiatives. There's a lot of initiatives around, regulations on, what the industry can and can't do, and, reaching out, asking, and, asking questions, and supporting the port projects. Right now we've got a major project that's currently in a study, and that's the widening of our turning basins. As I mentioned, a vessel is referenced in TEUs, a 20-foot equivalent unit. The turning basins, which are essentially just, places where a vessel can turn around at like a cul-de-sac. So a vessel comes in, turns around, and comes back out. And right now, we have two turning basins. There's one in the inner harbor right here, and there's one in the outer harbor. They were designed for 14,000 TEU, really less than 14,000, but the max going through those turning basins right now is 14,000 TEU vessels, and we're designing them now for 24,000 TEU vessels. And the 24,000 TEU is about 1,300 feet. So another area, where you can help is, continue, when appropriate, is to educate and, others that, ocean shipping still is the most cost-effective, environmentally friendly way, to move product. And until, the U.S., becomes completely reliant on its own manufacturing, its own, raw materials, we will need shipping. And so, I'm a shipping advocate. I believe we're going to need shipping, forever. It's one of the oldest trades, in the world, and we continue to support it. Other than that, there's other ways. There's a lot of different, programs, right now of really for the ports and other supply chains, really to try to work together. If there was any success out of the COVID, the COVID congestion is for the discussion, to occur, and for really people to start to talking more. So, so with that, I mean, I think I'd be happy to, we'll sit down and start taking some questions.
Perfect, wonderful. Thank you very much. Great, Brian. Holy cow. So, many of us take for granted shipping in the whole containerization revolution that's happened in the last half century. But help us get some sort of rough parameters on the port itself, the Port of Oakland. So, first of all, how many acres big is it?
Yeah, so the Port of Oakland, the maritime area, is 1,300 acres, and that includes, you know, all the land and then 100 feet into the water.
Okay, and how many containers at once can you put in the port of your storage area there? Ballpark.
Yeah, so that's a great question. You know, we haven't done the math. You know,
how many trucks can pull in at the same time?
Well, back to the containers. I mean, I'd say at least 100,000 containers. We're not fully developed, as we still have the opportunity to grow, especially in the outer harbor for future containerization. Mm-hmm. Right now, we're parking trucks and containers out there, so it's not a terminal operation.
So I see the containers. I was just down the estuary this last weekend, taking some guests for a little tour of the bay, and down there is part of the tour. How I keep seeing them stacked up in ships. When they're on land, is there any limit to how tall you can stack containers? What's your protocol on that?
Yeah, so the protocol around the world on that is driven by safety. So it's really is how windy of an environment you're in, and then also the equipment that can handle the containers. So it's pretty common that the loads, which are heavier, can be stacked 4 to 5 high. And then
you said the loads. The loads? What did you mean by
loads? So loaded containers.
Okay, loaded. So okay.
Containers that have contents in them can be stacked 4 to 5 high.
Okay.
And then empty containers can be stacked 6 to 7 high.
Now, inside of a ship, are they stacked in the ship, or is there some structural support every couple of containers to keep them? Because it looks like there's more than 4 high in a ship.
There's much more than 4 high on a ship. So on the larger vessels, there's 14 below deck. So when you see the top of the deck, there's 14 below deck, and then what there's called hatch covers, and that's right at the right at the deck line. And these hatch covers are just giant steel plates, and above the hatch covers, they typically go another 10 to 12 high.
So 14 plus 12, so 26
it's
vertically. Even though they're not all supported, half of them are on the deck and half of them are below deck. Okay.
Correct, and even below deck, they all have what's called cones, and they're called locking cones, and they hold the containers together.
So they're modularly connect. Each new container comes on, then it clamps to the container below it and up to the one above it if there's one on top of it?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So you said 13,000 container units. Is that 13,000 20s?
13,000 20s. Yeah.
13,000 20s are half that number of 40s.
Correct.
So in other words, container ships can now handle up to like 6 or so thousand 40-foot containers.
No, the largest vessels are 24,000 TEUs. So
okay.
12,000.
So 12,000 40-foot containers. Yeah. That's like amazing. Yeah. How much is the typical cargo inside of a 40-foot container? What's the typical tonnage?
40,000 pounds.
Typically 40,000 pounds.
Correct.
And of all the contents that come in, you said that it's mostly appliances and clothing and furniture. And going out, it's food. What is it?
Yeah, the number one commodity going out is scrap.
Is scrap metal of some kind?
Scrap metal, scrap waste paper, and it's really going back out to be recycled, repurposed, and brought back in.
So back to the port for a second. Give us the org chart of the port. How many employees, not counting other people, contractors, but how many employees, and what's the org chart?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we have three business units: the seaport, the commercial real estate, and the airport. I'm in charge of the seaport. I report to our executive director, Danny Wan, and then we have a board of 7, and then there's a total number of roughly 450 employees throughout the port. Most of those employees, it's much heavier at the airport because the airport is actually an operating airport. So we have, we actually operate the airport, whereas the seaport, as I mentioned, we're a landlord and we lease out the seaport properties.
So now I've been on the board of a couple companies, and with a publicly traded company, generally we have like a dashboard. Sometimes we look at the dashboard weekly, sometimes as often as daily.
Yep.
And the dashboard, in the case of, let's say, CVS, the biggest drugstore company in history, we'd have, the turn rate, we'd have number of SKUs, we'd have revenue, we'd have, projected earnings, we'd have a bunch of different metrics. And as you get dashboards more and more refined, the letters keep getting smaller and smaller, like 6-point type and so on. So on your dashboard, what are the key metrics by which management evaluates its performance?
Yeah, so we, on most of them, unfortunately, we're not weekly. It's monthly, which is probably too long, but things move a little different on the public sector. But the key metrics are, total revenue, total expenses, total volume, and then we are looking at, number of tenants, number of the average dwell, the average turn times, and then the number of rail containers.
So give us some of those metrics. What's revenue? Give us put some numbers to those metrics.
Yeah. So total annual revenue for the seaport is around $180 million, and the expenses, they vary. Our budget it's about $140 million for expenses. The rest of that goes right back into the seaport as capital improvement. And as far as turn times with the terminals, we're trying to average 30 minutes to an hour. That's really goes back to that trucker experience. As far as total number of...
So the 30 minutes,
Yeah.
Give us what starts at the beginning of that 30 minutes and what's completed at the end of that 30 minutes.
Yeah, so again, even though we're not the operator, we do manage that.
Sure.
Because it's a big customer metric, so we get graded on.
Is that the time the truck is under the crane, or
No.
is that the time truck drives in the terminal?
Yeah, so these are external truckers. This is the time they arrive at the gate outside the terminal.
Yeah.
And then they go through the gate complex to be processed in. They're directed where their container is to be, to pick up or to drop off, and then they exit back out through the terminal.
Unbelievable.
It's a total transaction.
So in other words, they'll come into the terminal and at 12 noon, just nominally, and they'll go get their cargo, their containers, and exit the terminal in like 30 minutes average, you're saying?
That's the goal.
What's average?
The average is closer to 55, 60 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And so...
The reason that is longer is because 30 minutes is for a single transaction to either drop off a load or just to pick up something. Most of the truckers, which is good, do a dual transaction. They'll drop a load off and they'll pick up another container.
Wonderful. Yeah, good. And so essentially, when they pick up a container and drop it off, there's a crane which comes to, they've rolled underneath a crane and it picks it up and sets it into a stack or someplace else?
Correct. When they're dropping off a container, they'll go underneath the hook, what's called an RTG or rubber-tired gantry crane, and they'll go into this crane. The gantry crane will pick off the container and then set it on the ground. Then the driver, will take his chassis, whether it's leased or his own, and then go pick up the next container.
Now, I've seen some trucks, I've been given tours of the terminal, and I've seen where it seemed to me that they were picking up a container out of the inside of the ship and then dropping it onto the truck right next to the ship. Okay, so that seems like you didn't get stored on the ground at all in that case.
Yeah, so there's two different...
Was that just a demo they were giving me?
No. There's two different groups of our operators in there. So
Sure.
there's a closed loop of operators within the terminal.
Okay.
And then you have the external trucking companies coming in. So the ILW, the International Longshoremen Union, work all of our vessels. Their jurisdiction, requires that they have the right to work the cargo off the vessel to the point of the rest in the terminal. So it's the ILW would be the employees unloading the vessel, taking that container on that yard truck into the terminal into a point of rest.
I get it.
And then an outside trucker would come picking up from the terminal.
Are there little GPS tickers on these containers so you can keep track of where they're going?
They're not yet. So since containers have been made, there's a.
Are we patenting that idea today?
No, it's constantly people are looking at that. It's just always been too expensive. Right now, the unit cost is there. It's just these containers are very fluid. Most of them are leased, and they're like rental cars. They move in and out of different fleets, and so at some point there will be a GPS on every single one. There's a little pocket in every single container for a GPS, but they're not there yet.
So now I'm going to keep asking questions, but when I see a question from the audience, I'm going to ask that person to stand up. We'll give them a mic, and we can hear from them.
Great.
And the first such questions from the vice chairman of our committee, Kathy Trafton. Kathy.
I'd like to thank you for a wonderful presentation. There we go. I see a green light now. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I have a first question is, what lessons have we learned from the pandemic? And should another one happen tomorrow, how will we do things differently? Are we better situated?
Good question. Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah, no, it is a great question. I believe we're much better situated. And I get this question asked all the time, by our board and by Danny, and how I think we are as an industry, not just the Port of Oakland, but as an industry, is we're really communicating, much more. A prime example is the industry, like people, were followers. And if there was an issue of congestion in Chicago, then the entire industry decided to avoid Chicago. Well, that's really not what the industry needed. The industry just needed to back off 10-15% to allow Chicago to recover. Because then, by fully backing off Chicago, and when I mean back off is convert everything from rail into Chicago to now, transloading into a domestic container and moving it somewhere else, then you just transfer the problem somewhere else. So the DOT, federal DOT, has developed a tool called
Department of Transportation.
Yeah, okay. Has developed a tool called Flow, and it's not looking at a container level. It's looking at a much higher level to try to anticipate where big flows are going in throughout the United States, to try to anticipate, if there's going to be any issues. And then the carriers will get together and not all back off at once. They'll say, okay, let's everyone back off 5%, 10%, and adjust, supply chain, just so that we don't shift the congestion to somewhere else. So those types of conversations, those types of tools are in place now. So I think, we're going to be in a better spot.
A question comes in from our online live chat from John Bechtel. Will there be an inland port in the Central Valley?
Yes, there will be at least one inland port. Right now there's discussions, and I'm having discussions with 4 different entities. And, they range, all throughout Central California. And each one of these facilities will really, be a true commerce center to where it'll have, multiple warehouses. One of the facilities right now down in Shafter has already 5 million square feet of warehousing built. It has the ability and zoning and permitting done to build 50 million square feet of warehousing. And so this will attract the imports, and then which attracts the exports with the empty containers. So the containers will be railed into this facility, transloaded into these warehouses, and these containers will be used for exports to be then taken to one of the port complexes.
So where geographically is this? You mentioned a city, but where is that? Compared to Fresno, for instance.
This one is the most furthest advanced so far in California. It's just north of Bakersfield.
Just north of Bakersfield, okay.
But there's other ones being talked about in Fresno, in Merced, and then also in Stockton.
And so it's rail and truck accessible, but not water accessible.
Correct.
And that'll be like a terminal. That'll be a terminal for rerouting or routing shipping?
Yeah, so it'll be a complex to where containers come in, the cargo's taken out, put into warehouses, and then it'll be readily available to be put into domestic containers and taken directly to market.
Okay.
And that brings us to another question from our online audience. That is, will high-speed rail make a difference?
So high-speed rail will not, most likely, in our lifetimes, not be built for cargo.
Or just
for
be
cargo.
built.
So, a high-speed rail will definitely help for passenger traffic, but for cargo, a high-speed rail will not be used.
Okay. I have a question about the trucks.
Yeah.
When you mentioned the cost of the diesel truck, which is what, $200,000?
Yeah, about $200,000.
And then the electric truck is $500,000, yeah. And then the hydrogen is $700,000. Yeah. If you look at it in terms of fuel consumption and to operate them over a certain period of time, say 5 or 10 years, yeah. How do those look then?
Yeah, so it's on a standalone, Well, excuse me, not a standalone. If you look at everything, it's still cheaper right now for diesel because of the infrastructure, needed for a battery electric. You need to have the charging station, and to charge one truck for a quick charge, you need a 1 megawatt. I mean, 1 megawatt is tremendous. I mean, most people would have very difficult times, getting a megawatt into their facility. So you can have a trickle
compare to
charge.
I have a Tesla charging unit at home. How does that compare to a typical Tesla charging unit at a house?
Yeah, so your Tesla charger it's probably a tenth of it or a 15th of it.
So 10 times more than
Yeah.
a domestic home charging unit. Okay.
Yeah. Maybe more than that. Probably 20th. Yeah.
Okay.
Question from another online viewer. David James says, I suspect most of us are familiar with the effect of the Jones Act on the shipping industry, but I'm curious what effect it has on port operations.
Yeah. So
quickly recount what the Jones Act is.
Yeah. So the Jones Act, the Jones Act essentially says, and this is true for all cargo, and passengers are cargo as well. And this is if you're going in between two U.S. ports, you have to be a Jones Act vessel, which the true definition of a Jones Act vessel, it means the vessel was built in the U.S., it's flagged in the U.S., and it's crewed by U.S. crew members. But there are some slight variations depending on the availability, but at least they're crewed by, the minimum is you're crewed by U.S. There's some, about the hulls not being built in the U.S. But anyhow, the true flag is all of those being built in the U.S. It's critically important. So for Oakland, we have two carriers, Pasha and Matson, that are Jones Act providers. They service the Hawaii trade out of here, Hawaii, Guam. To the north they go to Alaska, but it's a critical component to the Port of Oakland. As far as operations, it's not that much different in the Port of Oakland as an international container, but their volume is critically important, to our business.
I have another question. What if I wanted to go online or look at an app to see where all the cargo ships are in the bay? Is there an app for that? There must be.
Yeah, there's plenty of them. There's plenty of them. I mean, marine traffic.
Okay. Is that what you use, or is that what you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, marine traffic is one of them. But there's Find My Ship. There's marine traffic. There's a couple of. I use marine traffic.
Okay, yeah. Marine traffic it is.
Yeah.
So somebody would go to marinetraffic.com or .org, and then from there you might be able to find an app like Kathy just mentioned, and you can monitor ships that are under AIS.
Correct.
What ships? Okay. Yeah. Using AIS. Okay.
Yeah. So if you see a vessel, coming in, you can open up and by the map, marine traffic, you can see what vessel that is.
Great. Yeah. Mitch has a question.
Yeah. Thanks for coming today.
Yeah.
The Port of Rotterdam and I believe Hampton Roads in Virginia have automated terminals. Is there any push by terminal operators to become totally automated?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a challenging question, but yes.
Are all good questions challenging questions?
Yeah. So there's automating a container terminal is extremely expensive, and you really need the right footprint to really fully take advantage of automation. And there's the operators that we have in Oakland truly believe that their partnership with labor, they can be more productive and cost effective with manning equipment than that automation. I don't want to say it'll never happen, but I don't see it happening in Oakland in the near future.
So give us some parameters on how when you measure the size of a port. Is it the number of containers they have? Size, physical square foot may not be as important as the number of containers you have. Yeah. You said you guys might have 100,000 containers. So what is the way to measure different terminals around? And is that the right question? Is measuring the size of the port the same as measuring the size of the terminal?
Yeah, so how, globally the standard, measurement for ports is total tonnage, through the port. But since the Port of Oakland is 100% containers, it's understood and accepted to be measured just strictly through TEU throughput. And for the past 10 years, Oakland's TEU throughput has been between 2 million and 2.5 million TEUs per year.
2.5 million TEUs a year. So that's 100 million 40-foot containers. Did I get that right? So give me the number again.
It's no, not
2
100
million.
million.
A million 40-foot containers a year.
Correct.
So 1 million 40-foot containers a year. Now, what's the biggest port by that metric? What's the biggest port on Earth? Hong Kong, Singapore. Which is it?
No, it's Shanghai. So,
Shanghai.
yeah.
Okay.
So Shanghai is by far.
What do you think the throughput is?
So Shanghai is. What I needed to go back and look at my stats, but it's probably pushing 30 million.
So 30x Oakland. We're 1 million. They might be 30 million.
15x. So it's 30 million T's.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and who's after Shanghai?
So you're going Shanghai. Singapore is still up there. Hong Kong is still up there. Then you'll move over to Europe, and Rotterdam is high. But LA, Long Beach combined. So LA, Long Beach are measured separately. They're both about 10.
Okay.
But combined, they're almost 20.
That's 20. Okay.
Yeah, and then Port of Newark and Port Elizabeth in New York would be second in if you combine LA, Long Beach.
Okay.
And then Savannah is also growing quite a bit.
What is New Jersey?
New Jersey is right around 9. So
Okay.
they constantly flip flop between LA. Well, LA and Long Beach flip flop between each other of which one's the largest. And then just the last couple of years, Port Elizabeth, Newark, and New Jersey is surpassed LA for a brief period, but now LA's.
What about Chicago?
Chicago, there's no international. Well, there's no international water traffic. Chicago is dominated by the rail traffic.
Mm-hmm. But there's still containers. So
a
don't
lot
they
of
have
containers.
terminals? Do they have terminals as well?
They have rail terminals.
Okay,
Yeah.
rail terminals come in. Okay,
Yeah.
so when you think about the number of these big cranes that are growing over in the East Bay, I remember when the first cranes came under the Golden Gate Bridge, it was a big debate over whether we should have Chinese cranes or make them ourselves. You remember that moment, I'm sure. First of all, when did those cranes come in, and how tall are the darn things? And weren't they coming in when they were disassembled and reassembled on the port? Tell us a little bit about these cranes and how they've revolutionized your business over there.
Yeah, so these cranes came into to SSA terminal, and SSA is one of our largest terminal operators. It's Stevedoring Services of America. They have terminals all over the U.S. and actually the world. But they bought these 4 cranes. These are the tallest at the time. They've been surpassed now. They were the tallest cranes in the U.S. And so when we talked about the number of containers on a vessel, they're able to handle 12 containers high on the tallest vessel, and that's really what ocean carriers are looking for, is to ensure that the terminal operator can handle its vessel when it's fully laden, and so it has containers all the way to the top. But it also the containers also look at 2 components: the height of it and then the outreach. We've really not only talked about the height of these containers and the vessels, but the vessels, the 14 wide or 14,000 TEU vessels, they're only 20 wide, whereas the larger vessels, you can be 22, 23 containers wide. And if your containers, or if your cranes can't reach all the way on the outreach of the vessel, you either have to stow the vessel differently, or halfway through the operation, you have to flip the vessel, take the vessel back out, turn it around, and bring it back in.
Right.
So you really need the larger cranes to be able to handle the outreach and the height.
How tall are they?
From the cab, they're 179 from the cab, I believe. I'm not sure what the apex is.
Okay, 179. Okay, so that's 18 stories or so? Okay. Another question from the audience. Yes.
Yeah, quick one, Brian. I apologize if you already answered this.
Yeah.
We were a little bit late. We're from Sausalito. In the last few years, we've had unprecedented flooding because of sea level rise and storm surge. Wondering how the Port of Oakland is addressing that.
Yeah, that's another great question. So yeah, I failed to mention that we are we're looking at resiliency throughout all different aspects of for the environment, whether it's air emissions, water. So we're also looking at capturing and filtering water for storm drain runoff, but specifically for sea level rises, we did an initial study a couple years ago. Now we're actually having another consultant working on another study right now, and we're really looking at different areas, the first areas that would be susceptible to sea level rise, because we're really the protector of the communities behind us. So we've identified initially 3 areas to where we really need to build up and to protect the flooding. This is just on the port complex. There's other areas to either side of us that we really need to work with. So this is an initiative we really need to work with the BCDC on for an entire Bay Area plan. But yes, it's actively being worked on it.
We're part of BCDC, so we can help you with that.
Okay.
So thank goodness for journalists.
Yeah.
Journalists independently add lots of value to the culture, to society, and almost every discussion. And we have the publisher of Latitude 38 here. John, you have a question. John Arndt.
Thank you, Ron. Yeah, thanks. Interesting presentation. And I'm, as a recreational sailing magazine, mostly curious about crossover between commercial and recreational, where we align. And I think the 2 big things, or 2 of the big things I keep an eye on, we have a website on our page called Working Waterfront, are jobs and access. And jobs being most everybody in the country is looking for workers. And I'm guessing that's the same at the port, and it's the same with a lot of the recreational marine service businesses around the Bay Area, looking for workers. We have Cal Maritime up here. The other thing is just having access for the support vessels and all the industry that needs to be on the waterfront, which is getting built over by condominiums and other things that's squeezing the space available for maritime trade. And I'm wondering how active you are in sort of supporting the job market to supply your vendors, your tenants, and as well as the support services that support the activities that you're all engaged in, because I think those 2 things are real crimping our ability to be a marine trade.
Yeah, no, those are definitely a loaded question and a lot of interdependent questions. So representing the maritime department at the port, I'm very much very active and very involved in trying to protect and work with our stakeholders to preserve the maritime aspect of the seaport. And you're absolutely correct. It's not just the seaport. The pilots are based here in San Francisco. They're a critical component. The tugs that provide a vessel assist for the vessels to come in and out of the port. They're based both in Alameda and at the Port of Oakland, as well as San Francisco. Then you also have the bunkering barges, the fuel barges that service them, and then also the other barges to remove trash, bring up supplies, steel. So all of these components, and then right across the way, Bay Ship and Yacht that works on those smaller vessels, the pilot boats, the tugs, etc. So those are all critically critically important. And it is. There's housing is a critical. There's a shortage, right? You're always hearing about that, but. And as you know, and I know you're looking for this answer. I mean, all of these other functions we just talked about provide good jobs, good paying jobs that will last. And the housing, yes, it's needed, but if housing is continually built over it, it's going to remove some of these jobs. So, this is another area where, I'd ask for your help. When there are opportunities, to protect, maritime activities. That you support those activities.
Kathy has a question.
Yes, we have a question coming in from an audience viewer from online. The question is, what about military cargo? Is there any that you deal with?
Yeah, so we don't operate any military vessels, at the port. Right now, we have 5 military vessels that are essentially laid up. They're paying to be parked there. Just as they're out of service, they're just sitting there idle, and they're not there's no military on board. There's civilians on board, just managing the vessels and just to make sure they're functional. But as specifically for military cargo, we do have, several lines that operate military cargo. And this is where you have to have some type of the military cargo wants to have some type of Jones Act affiliation. There's not very many Jones Act international carriers anymore. In fact, there's no American-owned international carriers anymore. Only, for the Port of Oakland, only the two domestic, Pasha and Matson. So there used to be, Sealand and APL, which were American-owned and could move military cargo. Now the military has to get an exemption to move their own cargo, and they move it on, non-Jones Act vessels. So yes, there's military cargo going in and out of the Port of Oakland. Every port in the U.S., there's military cargo, but it's not identified and doesn't look any different to anybody else. It's in a container. A lot of it is in a refrigerated container, moving to different bases around the world.
How much seasonality is there to the shipping business at your container?
So there used to be a lot of. See, when I entered the industry, every year, we would meet in the early part of the year to talk about the peak. And there was always a peak season.
September before Christmas.
Before Christmas, there was always a peak season, and the graph would have a steady graph and a huge spike, and then it would tailor back off. But now, it seems as if every year there's some type of a crisis, some type of right now there's an issue with the water depth in the Panama Canal. So there's, we're seeing more, cargo being diverted from the West Coast or actually to the Suez Canal. So there's all sorts of different issues, and the seasonality, it's almost flattened out and leveled out. The shippers are really trying to move their cargo throughout the year to avoid, seasonal issues.
So you're saying that there's not enough draft of water in through the canal right now?
Correct.
And even with all the pumps pumping water in and out, they can't do that. So what happens if you can't go through the Panama Canal because your ship is too deep? You go around the Horn?
Yeah, you go around, so vessels are either calling just the West Coast,
Yes.
or when they're departing Asia or India, they're going, continue to go west and go through the Suez Canal.
Okay. All right. What's the biggest shipping line now? It's not an American, of course. What's the biggest shipping line in the world?
So the largest shipping company right now is MSC, Mediterranean Shipping.
Okay. And then what's the second biggest one?
Second biggest is Maersk.
Okay. So listen, Bryan Brandes, Maritime Director of the Port of Oakland, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thanks so much for sharing your insights with the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Great. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. What, all right?
This has been a presentation of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.